we make sure that we're leveraging their humanity. People have amazing ideas. They have, passions that they can bring all sorts of new ways of doing things if we just let them.
From humble beginnings, Insurance Claim HQ has grown to one of the largest property casualty firms in the country. We didn't do it alone, and you shouldn't either. Every week, we're talking to claims professionals and top experts from all over, all to help you grow your business and make you stronger. Let's level up together. I'm Galen Hair. Welcome to the Level Up Claims Podcast. A lot of leaders in any fast-moving business are great at solving problems, building systems, and pushing results. But they often hit a wall when it comes to leading people. They find themselves micromanaging systems, overwhelmed, and running on empty. Today's guest, Andrew Hinkelman, spent decades as a CTO feeling the pressure of always stepping in to fix things. Burnout taught him a hard truth. Leadership isn't about being the smartest problem solver in the room, it's about trusting your team. Now, as founder of Priority One Group and an executive coach to tech leaders and founders, Andrew helps leaders turn that corner. Let's welcome Andrew Hinkelman. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Galen. Thanks for having me.
So before we jump into it, I've got to know, it's not every day we have a former CTO on the podcast. So talk to us about your kind of career arc. I mean, you spent over 25 years doing corporate and technology, work, ultimately to end up kind of shifting your entire career. So what led you to where you're sitting today?
Yeah, it's a great question, Galen. I think one of the things that was sort of common to my path was just curiosity. So I learned a lot about technology along the way, stayed fresh on what it took to really manage people and lead high-performing teams and everything. And I also recognized when I was getting bored and when I was burning out. So I really got to a point where having meetings from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day, going home feeling like I hadn't really accomplished much was really, really wearing on me. And I knew I needed to make a change. So I did some work and some research and decided that my next challenge would be starting my own business.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that happens a lot, and the meeting drain is so real, right? I'm trying to think through this. I was listening in on a conference call the other day, and someone sent out a text afterwards saying, "Congratulations, guys! Another hour of all talk and no action." And I couldn't help but laugh. Thankfully, it wasn't for my company. Had it been for my company, I would have been very, very sad. Let's talk a little bit though before we kind of jump into the change itself. Like for me, at least, I feel like it's just the unsustainable pace that so many leaders go through. What was your experience, being a CTO? Like, did you feel like you were always needed by everyone, even if you weren't needed by everyone?
Completely. And, that's kind of what happens when you move up through your organization, right? You've kind of created this reputation for being very decisive and being, knowing the right way to go. And that helps you. It helps your career, but you're also kind of training people to need you along the way. So, the other part of it that I think you're getting at really is a lot of times in an organization, you're stepping into a well-established machine. So you're really getting into something that has been moving without you and has a pace, has a culture, has, a shadow culture, has all these things. And, a lot of times they move at a pace that's hard to control.
Yeah, and I think the shadow culture is a really interesting point too, because I think we don't love to talk about it, but we build this culture of dependency on our leadership, and I feel like that's one of the things I would assume that's one of the things you have to address, kind of in your current kind of iteration of your career, doing so much coaching and leadership training.
It is, and I like to bring it back to just people in general. So we put a lot of emphasis on having a process and having flow charts and all that. But at the end of the day, the real decisions are made by people. And behind those people are people they trust. So a lot of times the person that you think is making the decision is going and asking one of their rock star direct reports that they trust. And that, when I say shadow culture, it's like, well, there's the thing on paper, but then there's the way decisions actually get made. And that is very, very people oriented.
Talk to me more about that. So it strikes me one of the things that you have kind of really pushed on is there's a lot of leaders that would rather kind of have a system first approach to addressing things. And that makes sense. Look, some of us are stressed and up late at night and they see the ads that get played and they're things like, oh, pay me for this and I'll put a system in place at your company where you won't even have to do anything anymore. And you're like, oh, I shouldn't be even awake right now to see this ad. Let me do this. But I think you disagree that really I'm sure you agree that systems are important, but you disagree that systems are really the primary focus in order for a leader to kind of move the ball in the company. And so go ahead and talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Look, you need your systems, you need your frameworks, you need things documented in order to scale, because you can't scale if you have to run around to every new employee and teach them all these things that are in the back of your mind. So operational maturity, capability, maturity model kind of stuff, those things are really critical. But let's remember that at the end of the day, people work well with people they like. So there's this phrase that you've probably heard a million times: know, like, trust. Right. And we do work with people that we know and that we like and we want to be around and that we trust. And even internally at companies, that's the way the real decisions, the way the real hiring decisions get made, the budgeting, all those kinds of things. It's person to person.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think the trust is important. So how do we as leaders then encourage our teams to begin to trust each other, to move through the know, like, trust process?
Yeah. I think if you're a leader, that means you're modeling behavior. And so the encouragement needs to be there, but the modeling is 1,000 times more important. So if you're modeling building great relationships with your peers, your boss, your boss's peers, whoever it is, and you can go to your team and say, get to know these people around you as humans so that they know where you're coming from. You guys can have some shared interests, some shared goals, all those kinds of things. Then they're going to kind of get the people aspect of it. But modeling the behavior that you want from your team is 100% critical.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. Let's talk about kind of emotions and how those work out. One of the things I wanted to talk about is kind of the emotional cost of leadership. Burnout is very real, right? Blind spots are very real. So what kind of emotional blind spots tend to surface most amongst really good technical leaders?
I coach a lot of chief technology officers. I coach a lot of CEOs that are founders in lots of different kinds of industries. Doesn't need to really be tech or anything, but when we talk about emotional blind spots, we're really talking about self-awareness. So one of the reasons why emotional intelligence is critical and misunderstood is we feel like we are who we are. You just love me or leave me, right? Like, you get what you get, right? And at work, that's not really the case, because if you're a jerk, no one's going to want to work with you and eventually you're going to get fired. So one of the biggest emotional blind spots is just self-awareness and how we show up in meetings. So, Netflix had this whole thing about no brilliant jerks. So they codified it in their culture and everything from early days. They said no one is smart enough that they can just walk around being a jerk. Everyone has to be good at collaboration. So, being self-aware enough where you know how you're showing up and how it affects other people is non-negotiable.
Okay. Uh, and I guess that self-awareness is really important in how that affects you, but I think one of the issues becomes in emotional intelligence, right? And I think people that are very very technical, very sciencey, very, even type A sometimes, I don't think that's necessarily a fair classification. They treat like emotional intelligence as like data noise. Um,
Well, yeah.
but it's not. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I like to describe it as your gut. You get like a gut feeling on something, and if you really think about it, and I want to pose this back to you, Galen, like there are probably situations where there's something complex going on, something expensive. Someone has a spreadsheet for it. There are some things where you're looking at, the quantitative aspects, and then you walk away and you're like, something doesn't feel right about some aspect of this. And so your gut is really, and maybe you call it instinct, maybe you call it something else, but a lot of times there's another piece of data that you have access to. So I like to talk about it as data. And that is a lot, like when you have really highly analytical quantitative folks, I like to ask them like, well, what are you doing with the other data? The data when someone brings up it's something you hadn't thought of, or when you walk away, you wake up in the middle of the night, questioning something. So is that something that you're familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see it a lot, both personally and with others. I think this tends to come up. I think people are complicated in and of themselves, and as you grow, there become more and more complicated personalities in a room. And the interchange between those personalities is not always congruent or compatible. And that becomes a more challenging thing for a leader too, especially if you started like I did with a company with like 7 people where everyone just like really got along and we're all really friends, and you didn't have to put
Yeah.
in that work, right? So, and I guess because of that, like I think it's always an interesting thing because so many of our listeners are businesses that are either have grown substantially or are very much in growth mode right now. And I think, they have those questions. Like, so I guess for you, what was your aha moment? You decided to open your own business. I get it. And that makes sense. But there must have been some realization about the way companies were being run, whether it was specific to the tech space or elsewhere, that you were like, here is this thing that I can offer that just no one is talking about enough.
I spent, 25 years in technology organizations, and I was always a little bit of an anomaly. I was the guy who was a little more curious about the business strategies and translating them to technical strategies. So I like to go up the middle between business organizations, marketing, sales, all of that, and then the engineering organization. And one of the big things that I realize is a lot of technical and quantitative people are incredibly underserved as far as developing what I like to call human-centered skills. It's leadership skills, really. It's things that we take for granted if we're not super quantitative. So we take for granted like, hey, you have to build relationships. You have to learn to communicate better. You have to do all these things so that people want to work with you. So to me, it was just like I had gone through this whole process in my career, and most trainings are terrible. They are generic. They don't relate to the intense pressure of being sort of like in an engineering kind of role or a technical role, and they're really hard for people to grasp. So I just felt like so much of these people that have a huge effect in the world are incredibly underserved.
And when you say underserved, to be clear, are you saying like we as leaders are not assisting them in developing those skills?
That's exactly it. And you go through your whole career just expecting to know stuff. Like, what are you just watching YouTube videos, reading blogs? It's very, very do it yourself.
Yeah, I do love me a good YouTube video in all fairness, but not always the best way to learn. And then you have to know
Yeah.
what to look up in the first place, right? You can't just type into YouTube, be a good leader. Well, you can probably will lead you astray significantly. Um, so let's talk about, just because it keeps coming up with everyone, let's talk about AI as it relates to leadership and, partially this whole growth idea. So I personally am not in the AI is going to replace everyone yet camp. Now, look, there's a time, I suppose. I think we'll definitely need robots and a lot more than that. But, how do you believe that leaders should alter their leadership style, or at least messaging that they should be aware of, as AI becomes to come in, help with problem solvers and frontline staff?
I think that most leaders are either going too far or they're dragging their feet and not addressing it. It's here. It can be beneficial. Some people are waiting to, lay off tons of people, and some people are just pretending like it's no big deal. But I think the right message is that it can help you. And so treat it for now, right? We're at the end of 2025. For now, treat it like a tool that you need to learn how to use. And I'll give you a really concrete example. People are getting better slowly at prompting, just in, like, say, Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude. It's pretty undervalued how powerful you have a brainstorming partner right next to you at all times if you can just write the better prompt. So I think that in a lot of ways you have an assistant, at least a thought partner, for your job. And I think the leaders of companies should encourage that. You have to be smart and be a little aware of data privacy and things like that. But I would just say we should be encouraging people to use it and use it as much as they can. That's productive.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I do think I think a lot of leaders fall into the like too much or not enough. They put in too much AI and also run around telling people it's going to replace them, or they just ignore it and pretend it doesn't happen. I think there's got to be
Yeah.
a middle ground there. So let's talk about kind of some of your experience. I think burnout is such a risk, right? I think that so many people face it all the time. I'd like to talk about your journey, kind of as CTO, right? So
Sure.
was there a time where you kind of changed your mindset? Like, can you remember a specific incident or a story where you kind of changed your mindset from always fixing things to trusting your team? Because that seems to be one of your core messages in your teachings, is trusting your team and figuring out how to trust your team and developing that trust so they can kind of get you to where you need to go as well. And that's good leadership. But in your time as a CTO, which is very impressive, did you ever do that and kind of see the results yield?
I did. I did that a lot. I created a world where people had to come to me, people had to include me. I was the answer guy. And a lot of people will then let you keep going with that. And there was a very, very specific situation where my boss came in on a Monday morning yelling at me because some other team didn't have what they needed over the weekend and they had to stay up all night and everything. And I was like, this has nothing to do with me. The answer to this is like 3 levels down in my organization and should have been corrected months ago. And it's only becoming my problem because I didn't follow up. I didn't verify that these things were actually fixed. So at some level, you can't scale yourself. And you realize, like, you know what, something's going to come up because I have made everyone come to me all the time.
Fair.
Um, yeah, it those things, they pop up. They're going to be cracks in the wall.
Can you think of a situation that you wish you had kind of behaved more in line with the things you teach now?
Oh, geez, there's examples all over the place, but probably one of the worst examples of this is just pushing people out that were smarter than me. And I don't take any. I mean, I'm mortified when I think back to some of the really smart people that I was kind of threatened by. There were great people that I was peers with, and then I became CTO and they started reporting to me and they were a little threatening, right? They
Mm.
knew more, they were more technical, they knew the business better. I just happened to have stronger relationships in some areas. And instead of leveraging them and giving them a longer leash and like kind of having shared goals that we were all getting behind, I pushed out plenty of people that were smarter than me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy. I think, people forget that we're all human, right? And it's easy to be
Yeah.
intimidated by someone else, especially if you do come up, right, with peers and then they're kind of right below
Really.
you. Well, is that person a threat? If I make one mistake, is this person going to be ready to take my job? Is this person looking for me to make a mistake? And depending on the size of the company, the politics can feel so cutthroat, which is also hard. And I don't think it's just a size thing. But so what are some practical ways for leaders that are kind of at the end of the rope, like emotionally, mentally, to kind of replenish some of that energy?
A lot of burnout happens because you're caring too much about things you don't have control over. And this is a bit of what happened with me, which is why didn't I get invited to that meeting? Why did that person cut my budget? Why did that team over there do that without asking me? Why are all these things happening? And why do they mean that people aren't paying enough attention to me? So using all of these things as a way to kind of beat up on myself or feeling like, maybe I'm not as important as I used to be. Right. So like when you start to care too much about things that are out of your control, you're really asking for trouble. And you're asking for a lot of kind of, self-denigration, really is what it is. So what I tell people is know your lane, know what you control, know what you can affect, and put your passion in there as a bit of a reset. It's because going to Fiji for 2 weeks and surfing is not gonna be enough. When you're deep into burnout, just taking a couple of weeks off, it's not gonna do it. Like, you have to change how you operate Monday through Friday.
Yeah, I could not agree more. All right. So over the next 5 to 10 years, the leaders that are absolutely going to destroy it, they're just going to excel. What are those top three qualities that you think they have?
That's a great question, Galen, and I think, I'm gonna tie it back to our AI discussion a minute ago, which is that I like to say this thing, what happens after AI? So what is after AI? After AI is where we are so good with people and knowing the people around us that uh, we make sure that we're leveraging their humanity. People have amazing ideas. They have, passions that they can bring all sorts of new ways of doing things if we just let them. So let's use AI as a tool to get rid of a lot of busy work and kind of open up the door to more of the humanity that's already around us.
I absolutely love that. All right. So if we want to kind of get a better hold on these things and we're looking for help, what's the best way to work with Priority One Group?
Well, I do a few different things for companies and for individuals. So I coach individuals. I do a lot of one-on-one coaching. I do team and group coaching as well. And people can find me pretty easily on LinkedIn and just reach out. But um, the most important thing I'll say is that I like to talk to people, just get introduced to people. So I usually meet people for an hour. I'll just do sort of a coaching session for an hour, pure coaching, not sales, not anything related to trying to get them to pay for coaching, but just strictly give the experience of coaching. So, I also do some consulting here and there. I'll do fractional chief technology officer work as well.
That all makes sense. Andrew, I want to thank you for joining us and being so generous with your time. Before you do go, though, I would like to ask you, what does it mean to you to level up?
Stephen Pressfield is an author. He's written a bunch of books. One of them is called Turning Pro. And in Turning Pro, he talks about going from being an amateur to a professional and all of the things that go into defining what it means to be a professional. And one of the core ones is being able to work when you don't feel like it. And if we were all at the point where we were able to work, even when you don't feel like it, have the tough conversation, even when you don't feel like it, address an issue, even when you don't feel like it, then I think that we're all going to level up a bit here and there.
Andrew, I could not agree more. Thank you again so much for spending the time with us.
Absolutely, Galen.
I'd like to thank Andrew Hinkelman for joining us on the podcast. He couldn't have said it better. Sometimes the difference in leveling up is just being able to work, even when you don't want to. But that sounds a little too easy, doesn't it? It's all those pieces that go into that. It's avoiding that burnout, learning to trust your team. It's all those building blocks that eventually get you there. But without it, it doesn't quite work. Follow us on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date on our latest podcasts.